In the world of Yes fans, there's an endless supply of total must retain and topographic opinions. Tomatoes get thrown, and some albums will either be revered or hated. There's no middle ground in prog, it seems. Then there's the case of 90125, a game-changing record for the band that holds a similar blessing and curse to Genesis' Invisible Touch, yay. It was their MTV era hit. New fans loved it. Older fans were not happy. But unlike the sounds of the British trio going full synth-pop, 90125 remains a hard-rocking album thanks to Trevor Rabin, a genius musician that could do it all. He could shred like Van Halen, deliver session work magic chops like Lukather, and both sing and arrange like Brian May. An accomplished composer and phenomenal singer who was caught up in the heat of the moment, and next thing he knew, gave Yes a second career comeback and sales figures they can only dream of. All thanks to a hit single and iconic guitar solo, Owner of a Lonely Heart. I was 9 years old when I heard it for the first time in 1996. My mom loved the track and would always turn up the radio when I came in. I didn't know Yes, but it was the song of the big guitar intro and crazy sounds, and for some reason I associated the guitar tone to the theme song of a cable TV rerun, Beverly Hills 90210. Fast forward to my teenage years, I discovered Yes via Close to the Edge, thanks to one of my mom's friends who made me a cassette copy and said, "This is the real deal, unlike Owner of a Lonely Heart." Then one of my math tutors tipped me off on more Yes albums, but said beware of 90125, that's not Yes. Fast forward 2005, and I used my first ever paycheck to buy a PlayStation 2 with GTA's Vice City, and there it was. Owner of a Lonely Heart was a part of Flash FM's programming as you enjoy the violent streets of Miami Beach 1986.
When these guys are done with me, I'd walk like an Egyptian. Or a cowboy.
Flash FM.
Then in 2008, a music teacher and mentor gave me a huge compliment saying my guitar soloing style reminded him of Trevor Rabin. I said, "Who's Trevor Rabin?" My teacher played his CD copy of the album, and my initial reaction to the songs after the hit single was that of surprise. It was a futuristic record with a special kind of polish. Tracks my 21-year-old self loved were Hold On, Cinema, Changes, and City of Love. I asked my music teacher to play Hold On and City of Love again. They had a Led Zeppelin vibe to it, and I pictured Jimmy Page playing with Yes. Songs I didn't like that much but enjoyed were It Can Happen, Leave It, which sounded like some 90s Nickelodeon music, I swear, and Our Song. Closing track, I hated. Hearts made me avoid a 90125 purchase for about 12 years. I finally convinced myself to get a CD copy in the early stages of COVID. I wanted the 1994 remaster but had to settle for the bright sounding and slightly compressed 2004 reissue. But I got a consolation prize with a vintage cassette copy I acquired in 2023, a much better listen that sent me back to 1983, the year my parents first met, and the year I was negative 4 years old. But above all, it's the hit single what lures you back into the record, with a sense of amazement at a special decade in what the world could have been. The 80s that dream about the future in bright lights, venture capital substance, and vivid colors. There's an underlying sense of melancholy in 90125, juxtaposed to the aggressive ambition and bravado of its players captured on tape. In a modern-day world where 80s nostalgia lives through abandoned mall videos, vaporwave art, and sense of Miami Vice, Owner of a Lonely Heart is a fitting title in these tired cities and towns where our future has been stolen and humanity turns into a dystopian commodity. Trevor Rabin was right. It's better to be lonely than broken. And well, Frank Zappa said broken hearts are for assholes. Maybe he was onto something. Yes' album is a fresh reminder of a turning point for the big names of progressive rock. In a year where ELP was gone, Asia lost steam on their follow-up, Pink Floyd released a final cut, King Crimson recorded their last 80s album, and Genesis was one album away from going in too deep. Like Tony Montana said, first you get the money, then you get the power, then you get the woman. In the case of 1983, yes, it was first you get the Trevors, then you get the songs, then you get the money. The 80s of chance, primitive computer graphics, and affordable housing. This is a story of Yes' all-time best-selling album. This is the making of 90125. December 1980, a cold and very depressive winter in England. Led Zeppelin's breakup was made official on the 4th. John Lennon was killed on the 8th, and Yes played their final show on the 18th as the second of 2 nights at London's Rainbow Theatre. Yes released Yes shows in time for Christmas, and it sold pretty much the same number of copies as Drama. It was the end of their Drama tour, and drama ensued. While their 10th studio album was a smart choice into the future with thrilling compositions, the band's on-stage adventure painted a very different picture. The void left by both John Anderson and Rick Wakeman past 1979 went beyond a mere personnel change. It marked the very end for a lucrative period and comeback for Yes, with Going for the One and Tormato. You can check my retrospective for the latter here on the channel. Bringing in the guys from Video Killed the Radio Star The Buggles into Yes made sense to embrace the 80s. It was a good studio plan, but this was Yes, and their live shows suffered. Squire, White, and Howe learned their lesson. Their 40-city tour of North America 1980 rode the coattails of previous success, with no marketing materials letting people know about the lineup change. Trevor Horn's voice had no big stadium experience, and the band knew it from the start. It wasn't his fault, and he pushed his vocal cords to the limit. Fans quickly realized he wasn't the right fit to replace John Anderson on the old numbers, and it set a domino effect that made this the shortest-lived Yes lineup ever. Trevor Horn left while Jeff Downes and Steve Howe packed their bags for Asia. Now, Asia's early rehearsals had an up-and-coming guitarist by the name of Trevor Rabin, but the chemistry didn't work out. Atlantic Records senior vice president, Phil Carson, hosted a Christmas party in his house. He reintroduced 2 of his guests, Jimmy Page and Chris Squire. #1 hit single that week was John Lennon's Just Like Starting Over, a fitting song for what happened next. Page, Squire, and Alan White decided to give it a try and jam. Demo sessions for XYZ, ex Yes Zeppelin, took place in January 1981 over at Jimmy's Soul Studios. Page used it as much needed therapy as he was battling depression after Led Zeppelin's demise. For White and Squire, it was wishful thinking, as their Yes manager Brian Lane did not get along with Zeppelin's Peter Grant and the project did not continue. Despite business tensions shutting it down, there was a positive side of Yes bandmates playing with Jimmy Page. It was a preview into a more conventional approach to rock and roll without losing complexity. You can check my post Led Zeppelin 1980s episode 1 for the complete story behind these sessions. March 1981, Yes made it official. They announced their breakup and both drum and bass virtuosos were bandless in England. So it was down to Atlantic senior vice president, who was one of the few people who jammed on stage with Led Zeppelin. Phil Carson knew he had to work fast to get his former Yes man busy. With Age already in pre-production for their debut album, he was running out of options. In the other side of the Atlantic, there was Geffen Records, who persuaded 27-year-old Trevor Charles Rabin to move to Los Angeles for a serious shot at a big break. Born in South Africa in 1954, musical genes ran in his family. His career began in 1972 with a series of local projects that gained traction and established Rabin's name as a sought-out session musician. He released his debut album Beginnings in 1977. Unlike Meatloaf's Battered of Hell, it was a 36-minute collection of great songs with wild guitar work, astute melodies, and soft textures in between. Think Christopher Cross meets Thin Lizzy meets Toto meets Boston meets 10cc. He also scored a movie by the name of Death of a Snowman. He could do it all.
Recognize him. red light. I'm out.
Political tensions in South Africa made Rabin look for another destination. He relocated to London in January 1978 as producer for a small label. Trevor released a follow-up in 1979, Face to Face, with all original songs and Fairport Convention's Dave Maddox on drums. The more you listen to his early albums, it's clear he could see into the future of 80s rock, with strong metallic sounds and catchy choruses. He was putting in the work, aiming for the highest places in the industry. Rabin's production credits added Wild Horse's debut and Manfred Mann's Chance, featuring additional guitar work by him. His third solo album, Wolf, was released in January 1981, around the same time the XYZ rehearsals took place. 'Despite the impressive credit personnel of bass players Jack Bruce and Mo Foster, Manfred Mann and drummer Simon Phillips, the label did a poor job promoting the record, which fueled Trevor Rabin's decision to leave the UK. He had the chops and had a great voice, yet it seemed solo success was elusive. He needed a different and bigger platform. Rabin was now in Los Angeles, and his development deal with Geffen was not looking good. So he shopped around his demo tapes, which included a song by the name of Owner of a Lonely Heart. Many executives thought he didn't have any top 40 hits. "1981 was a complicated market for Trevor Rabin, with Billy Squier the closest approximation in terms of a solo artist. Hit single The Stroke had guitars up front, with a sort of Robert Plant-ish delivery. Musically speaking, Rabin's solo material lived in the universe of Keep on Loving You, Urgent, and Don't Stop Believin', but these were band efforts. The only way for him to make it was to get a group thing going. RCA Records wanted to develop Owner of a Lonely Heart as a single, but Atlantic Records' Phil Carson got a hold of Rabin's demo tapes, and he was impressed. His friend and producer Mutt Lange shared the same opinion, and was happy to see his fellow South African connection, with whom he cut several records back in the 70s. Rabin was given two options: a supergroup of Cozy Powell, Jack Bruce, and Keith Emerson, or jam with Alan White and Chris Squire. Trevor made his decision, while Squire, White, and prog lyricist Peter Sinfield released a Christmas song, Run with the Fox, in October.
Now the season, now the question, run with the fox into the wind.
Despite Yes breaking up, a December 1981 compilation classic Yes was well received by record buyers, with almost exact sales figures to the Yes album, and just 100,000 copies less than Tormato. There was still a market out there for Yes, but fans could only hope for a reformation. Trevor Rabin, Alan White, and Chris Squire spent most of 1982 rehearsing new material as Cinema. Squire brought in Tony Kaye, who was the keyboardist on Yes's first three albums. Because Cinema's material was not as complex as the Wakeman and Moraz era records, Squire thought Kaye was the right man for the job. And also Moraz was shamefully kicked out of Yes, and Rick Wakeman had no interest in coming back anytime soon. So Tony Kaye was the only available Yes man they could get. Tony had been involved in various bands throughout the 70s, including 2 records with rock band Detective, who were signed by Led Zeppelin's Swan Song back in the mid-70s. Now, despite them being a busy working unit, Cinema didn't have a record label behind, and their sole patron was Phil Carson, who funded the operation. I want to take this opportunity to thank my dear patrons for funding my research facility over at JCM Studios. Thank you for making this episode possible. So Cinema worked on some 30 songs, including previously XYZ material with Jimmy Page, and their own version of Promenade from Pictures at Exhibition in true ELP fashion. The main contributor here was of course Trevor Rabin, who had his demo tapes and blueprint into the type of music he wanted to develop. It has to be said, Rabin never auditioned for Yes, nor joined Yes. He was the actual starting point for the new project. Yes fans who criticized this era of the band failed to comprehend the context and should actually thank Rabin for getting Yes back in the game, where Asia was pretty much done by 1986. Unlike the arrival of Steve Howe, Rick Wakeman, Alan White, and Patrick Moraz, Trevor led the creative endeavor with former members of Yes joining forces. Phil Carson believed in Cinema, and he would be further motivated to make this work as the record industry stakes got higher. Asia's debut, released in March 1982 and Toto 4 in April, sold almost 10 million units combined. Add in both Alan Parsons' Eye in the Sky and Frank Zappa's record with Valley Girl on it, released in May, and King Crimson's Beat in June, plus Genesis' live double album, and there was definitely a market for progressive rock, embracing the sounds of the 80s. There was also a comeback feel for 70s bands like Chicago 16 with Hard to Say I'm Sorry. It's not hard for me to say this song sucks, but it scored them riches and revitalized their career. Fleetwood Mac had a huge hit with Mirage, and Robert Plant dared to go solo with Pictures at 11, contributing to the winds of change in production styles where guitars met their synthesizer counterparts. Culture Club, Thriller, and Senor 80's Phil Collins filled the air with hopes, drum machines, gated reverb, and a fitting soundtrack for a new dawn of commercialism. Compilations like Foreigner's Records, The Eagles' Greatest Hits Volume 2, Timepieces, The Best of Eric Clapton, and the John Lennon Collection confirmed rock and roll giants were highly profitable releases. It was time to bring back Yes, one way or the other.
1981 was also the year that one of the world's most popular and beloved groups announced that after a major personnel change in 1980, they would finally break up. The band was Yes. Guitarist Steve Howe and keyboard player Jeff Downes can be heard in the new band Asia. Vocalist Trevor Horn will pursue a solo career, while founding member Chris Squire and drummer Alan White have yet to announce their plans.
Former Yes singer Trevor Horn was back at the office with the Buggles, releasing their follow-up, Adventures in Modern Recording, in November 1981. The sessions got off on the wrong foot, with Jeff Downes joining Asia on the first day of recording. This in turn made the record company wary of the Buggles' future, thus they were dropped from Island Records. Trevor Horn was pissed off, rightfully so, but it was the heat of the moment telling him what to do. Although Jeff Downes did write songs and play on the album, and the band managed to be signed by a French label, sales figures were dismal compared to the previous effort, despite hit single I Am a Camera, which was first released on Yes's Drama. Trevor Horn switched the frontman limelight for production, working on the Lexicon of Love by English pop band ABC. Released in June 1982, it spawned 4 hit singles and put Horn's name on the studio map. Slick sounds, slick 80s. This was electronic architecture, and Trevor Horn was a fortune teller. He was in tune with the sounds of the decade. He tried out as singer for Cinema, and although his voice didn't suit the project, Horn did listen to all the tracks they were working on, including Owner of a Lonely Heart. He didn't like the verses that much, but he loved the chorus, and told them the song would be a hit. He agreed to be the producer despite his previous Yes drama Goodbye, but it didn't matter to him. He was a fan of Yes and admired Chris Squire's virtuoso bass work. Recording sessions for Cinema began on November 1982. Just as Blondie broke up, Led Zeppelin released their posthumous album Coda, and Michael Jackson shocked the world just 3 days later. Cinema's music was captured at both Air Studios, where Duran Duran had done Rio, and SARM Studios West, which was the second location for SARM Studios East. This one opened its doors back in 1973, financed by businessman David Sinclair. his daughter Jill became one of the co-directors at the studio. SARM Studios West was the old Island Studios where Black Sabbath did Paranoid, Led Zeppelin recorded rhythm tracks for Stairway to Heaven, Bob Marley did Exodus, and Dire Straits recorded Sultans of Swing. There were good vibes in the building, to say the least. Trevor Horn married Jill Sinclair in 1982 and founded the ZTT record label, responsible for many titles including Frankie Goes to Hollywood's iconic 80s hits Relax and Two Tribes. Fast forward April 1983, David Bowie released his mega successful Let's Dance record, and Dave Mustaine was fired from Metallica. Dave would hold that grudge throughout his entire career. Now, the cinema camp experienced a similar situation with keyboardist Tony Kaye, who was fired from the project over creative and modern gear differences with Trevor Horn. Now, most of Cinema's debut album was already mixed, but the vocal side of things was not looking good. Despite Trevor Rabin and Chris Squire's best efforts, patron Phil Carson said they needed John Anderson, and there was no counter-argument. Carson had already invested a lot of money, so this had to be a hit. Alan White and Chris Squire were not sure about it. The post-Tormato beef was still fresh. Trevor Rabin was not happy at first, as he could see Cinema turning into Yes on drama. It was a similar script, get new blood to bring fresh sounding tracks. And this of course meant possible Yes fans and the expectations that came along with it. You know, the dreaded Yes-pectations. So where was John Anderson in 1983? Well, the 80s began with his first of 3 full album collaborations with synthesizer virtuoso Vangelis. Short Stories was released in January 1980. Anderson followed with his second solo album, Song of Seven, in November, with some ideas traced back to Yes's Tormato. John and Vangelis were back in July 1981 with the Friends of Mr. Cairo, which continued the playful pop approach they went for. It was a way for two prog legends to have fun and not sell many records.
Anderson's new career is that of his former compatriot, Yes guitarist Steve Howe, now a member of the group Asia. In conversation, Steve told me that to make Asia a success, he had to leave behind his background and not rest on the past laurels of Yes. John Anderson feels differently about that.
I decided that I was part of Yes. I started Yes with Chris in '68. I just want to please the audience at the moment and not really think too much about going on stage and doing what is now, you know. So I'm doing John and Vangelis, I'm doing some of my album, and then some of Yes music. And having been involved in writing it all, I can't leave it behind. And really, also I'm trying to carry on the tradition, because nobody else is going to do it, which is really strange. That if I don't carry on singing Yes music, nobody else will do it. And it's a shame, because I think it's great.
May 1982 saw the release of Anderson's third solo album, Animation. It showed Anderson venturing into the 80s with a careful approach to production, led by Neil Kernon, who did Hall & Oates' Private Eyes the year before. Drummer on the album was none other than Simon Phillips, and it shows. This is a very interesting part of the 90125 puzzle. My gut feeling tells me Phil Carson heard this album and went brainstorming for reunion ideas. Although Animation suffers from over-Andersoning itself, it sheds light into John's openness, working with the sounds of the 80s. Running up his career at the time, Anderson was a guest vocal on Mike Oldfield's album Crisis. Now, nobody had John Anderson's phone number, and he was working in France. But eventually Chris Squire managed to get a hold of him in England and played him the Cinema tapes. Anderson liked the material and he was in. He changed some of the lyrics, which gave him a then controversial writing credit on Owner of a Lonely Heart, even though he didn't participate on the song's creation. He went into the studio and recorded his vocals on top of the existing material. Phil Carson further moved the ball onto Atlantic's turf by convincing Ahmet Ertegun to pay for additional studio costs. But still, there was no label behind Cinema, and the bills were piling up. They decided to rename the project the New Yes Album, but the band didn't want to go for the Yes name. They tried to use the name Cinema, but apparently there were other bands with that name at the time. I found one from Japan. This is their 1981 release, Motion Picture. So Phil Carlson wasn't going to fund any legal battles for the name Cinema. Trevor Rabin was an owner of a worried heart, and he had his reasons. He knew the album wouldn't be judged the same under the Yes moniker, but Phil Carlson, the man who was offered to manage Led Zeppelin in the late 70s, convinced Rabin to go Yes. The album's sleeve design was a radical departure from Roger Dean and Hypnosis visuals. Because Dean did a cover for 2Asia Records, where Steve Howe and Jeff Downes were selling millions of copies, a different route was taken through an Apple II computer and 8-bit graphics in charge of assorted images, whose resume included the very uninspired The Biggest Prize in Sport and Metamatic from 1980. On the contrary, their work with Yes was highly effective as it represented the 80s aesthetic. Yes was signed to Atco Records and were giving a catalog number. There are two stories on this. One says it was 90124 and the other 80102. Now, the original artwork had a horizontal position as in a C-shaped design because it was first thought out for cinema. They added some pixels to turn this into a Y, and Yes was brought back from the dead. The final product was ready, but Yes didn't like how the numbers sounded, thus they suggested 90125, with no real meaning behind it. They just liked the combination. A very obsessive, compulsive, and progressive rock thing to do. Worry about the numbers. Note, I've always felt the colors on the album cover reminiscent of King Crimson's 80s trilogy, the Red, Blue, and Yellow album. So I checked hundreds of album covers for 1982 and found many possible inspirations for 90125. First, let's talk minimalism and solid colors. Van Halen, King Crimson, Led Zeppelin, Bad Company, Toto, and Rush. We've got the gray tones of Donald Fagen, Ultravox, Asia, Robert Plant, and Laura Branigan. We also have the solid gray backgrounds, including Keith Jarrett's concerts, and this by British post-punk band Au Pairs, which I dare to say was a huge influence on the final design for Yes. Let me also throw there Rational Youth and Church of Hawkwind. Next we have geometrical elements like Tangerine Dream and Spanish band Mecano. Last, there's the tricolor feel of Billy Squier, the Foreskins, Iron Maiden, Modern Man. This one even has some 3D tricolored graphics included. And last but not least, Gamma, which may have also inspired Genesis' own shapes. They say in the world of graphic design, there's rarely an original idea, but collective borrowing. I say Yes 90125 managed to blend many great sources into a great image that reflects the band's new sounds and attitude for the 80s. 90125 has some additional references to going for the one, with the tricolor motifs and shapes, including the gray buildings. There's also tricolored red, dark blue, and yellow on Tormato, and the circle on 90125 might as well be a tribute to Fragile, with the gray backdrops of Relayer. And the first album's logo, maybe. On the next episode of The Making of 90125, we'll dive deep into a musical analysis of the songs, plus the details behind their videos and their gigantic world tour in the cities of love, hearts, and money. You don't want to miss part 2.